Welcome back to ATL Insider. Now today we're talking about the differences between men and women in relationships.
And although there are some significant differences, one of the keys is good communication, because that can really help to smooth out some of those rough spots. So joining us now are all three of our guests. You guys have joined us for 2 weeks now. We appreciate you being here. Spirit, how important is communication?
Communication is extremely important, and what a lot of people don't realize is that we're always communicating. You know, of course it's the verbal communication, and that's what most people tend to be most familiar with. But then there's that nonverbal communication, which makes up more than 90% of the communication that we actually do. And so what we don't realize is that whether we like it or not, we're always communicating our needs and wants to each other.
Well, Mike, how do you feel about the way women communicate?
Well, as I said earlier, I think that it's important that they directly state what it is they want. You know, I think as men, we need to get thicker skin in terms of taking constructive criticism. We need to be willing to just directly state, you know, what we like and what we don't like, because ultimately that will help the relationship and make it a little bit stronger.
Okay. And India, what do you think about communication?
I truly believe that it's the most important thing in a relationship, period. I am guilty sometimes of not verbally communicating as much as I should, and expecting the guy to be the mind reader, and I'm cognizant of that, but yeah, it's the most important thing in a relationship.
It's so funny that you said that, though, because I think Ryan and I were talking about this when we were coming up with all of the topics. We felt it was important to talk about communication last, though, because all those other issues really can be ironed out, and if you will just talk. But don't you have a pet peeve there, Ryan?
Yes, I do. I'd really like to talk about it. And since I have the relationship expert here, I just have to know, because I've been wondering it for years. You know, a lot of times when I've had girlfriends in the past, why is it that if you're upset about something, or some women I should say, why can't you bring it up when it happens? I've had girlfriends say, you know, they're down, and I'm like, what's wrong? And they're like, do you remember 3 weeks ago? When if it happened over 7 days ago, I probably don't remember. So it's inadmissible in an argument. So why can't they just tell me what the problem is when it happens?
Well, you know, it's the same answer that I would give if you asked why is it that way for men. Some people just need time to process their feelings before they can effectively communicate that. And it's not necessarily always a bad thing. You'd rather have someone think about what it is that they want to bring to you rather than just put it out there and then expect you to somehow miraculously figure out what the answer is. So while it's not always a bad thing, if you have someone that's a pattern for, then you have to communicate the issue and how it affects you as well. So it's a two-way street in the communication.
Okay, now what should I do if I have a bad memory? Because oftentimes I'll say, I don't even remember saying that or doing that, and then it gets even worse. You know,
this is
like,
what you do. You say, you know what, I'm sorry that I made you feel that way, and obviously it really affected you. So can you tell me, even though I don't remember it the last time, the very next time it happens, can you point it out to me as soon as it happens, and then I'll know what it is that you mean.
So how do you develop the skill of communication? Because communication is a skill. It's not
Truly.
something that you're born with, and I think we all can attest to the fact that we don't always do it well.
Right.
Even the best communicators sometimes miscommunicate. So what would be your suggestion? And you guys, what are some of the things that you do to kind of open up the, you know, the lines of communication?
Well, I'll let them go first.
Okay, well, one of the things I know I do personally, I am willing to step out of my comfort zone.
Okay.
A lot of people, it's hard to actually verbalize what you want to say through word of mouth. Sometimes it might be easier for some people to write it down. You know, it all depends on what your most effective method of communication is, but whatever it is, you need to be willing to step out of your comfort zone and express yourself and open yourself up and be willing to take criticism in return. I think that's the biggest thing.
That's good.
I totally agree with him. The way I do it is through text messaging.
They say the
techno
version.
It's just easier sometimes, and I'm so guilty because I did that last night. What's wrong? Nothing. Oh, but I brought it up today. I brought it up today through a text message. Exactly. But yeah, text, I mean, just as long as it gets out.
Okay.
And then it comes up later, face to face. So.
Well, effective and ineffective, and they're aware of what those are, and so that's a good thing. I think that the most important thing, first of all, is always to think before you speak about what the goal is of what you want to communicate. And then you have to ask yourself, is what I'm about to say going to take me closer to or further away from that goal? For example, if you're wanting your partner to be able to understand your opinion, then it's not to say, you never just, and then you just go, because then what happens is you back them into a corner and they can't hear you anyway. So if the goal is to try to get them to understand where you're coming from, then you need to figure out the most effective way to be able to do that and then react. Secondly, it's also important to be a good listener. You know, we're always wanting to communicate our point, but we have to be able to learn how to listen to each other and not just listen to wait to the point where we're get that kind of breath so that we can jump in. Listen with your heart and with your head and wait to respond.
And don't deal in absolutes. I think that's important as
Right.
well. Though, you know, women, I think, sometimes are quick to say, well, you never do this, and you
Right.
never call.
People in
and
general,
exactly,
it goes
you
both
know,
ways.
well, that's true.
You always, every time we have a fight, you always bring up stuff from the past. It really goes
Exactly.
both ways.
So you
Yeah.
don't want to deal in those types of absolutes because the truth is no one always does anything.
Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
That is an absolute.
Yes, it is.
And I think, like she said, listening is key because I know one thing I had to work through was with my girlfriend was telling me a problem that she was having. I naturally was coming up with an advice with a solution. You know, I
Right.
had advice, and
Right.
I had to get to the point of understanding. She just wants me to listen, and she doesn't necessarily want me to solve the problem sometimes.
Right.
So I think that listening is key.
And another big one is not jumping in when we don't agree. As soon as our partner says something that we don't agree with, we go, no, no, no. And then what happens is we get into this escalation where the conversation gets louder and louder until it's a full-blown argument because both people are trying to say, no, it's my side that's right. Actually, there's never any one side that's right. There's always three parts to that. What he said, what she said, and then what really happened.
Yeah.
So you find the balance somewhere in between.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you all coming in. Spirit, we can catch you every Friday on
right.
1380 WAOK,
That's
the
right.
Relationship Expert. And of course, you can go to your website, www.myspace.com/talk-to-spirit.
And it's the number 2.
There you go, and you can get all kinds of relationship advice. You can email, right?
Absolutely.
Exactly,
All the
and then Mr. Atlanta University Center, Michael Chambers, and Miss Clark Atlanta University, we want to thank you because you came in for the last minute
Thank
for
you.
us, so we appreciate you
Thank you for having us.
coming in here and helping us out at the last minute. And then, of course, I got to thank this young man right here, Ryan Hirsch. This is his last show with us. He's graduating this year. Ryan, we want to thank you for being such an important part of the show for the last 3 years, helping to write, produce, shoot, edit, all the wonderful things you've done. We want to thank you and wish you much success as you go forth.
Thank you. I just appreciate the opportunity to work on the show.
All right, and then lastly, we want to thank you. Hopefully these last 2 shows about relationships has at least gotten you thinking about some of the things that you need to do to help improve the relationships in your life. Well, we want to thank you for joining us today on ATL Insider. We'll see you next week.